Princess Elena stood at the grand window of Ravencrest Palace, watching the morning mist roll across the ancient gardens. Her delicate fingers traced the cold glass as she tried to calm her racing heart. The events of the past hour had changed everything she thought she knew about her family, her life, and her future as heir to the throne of Aldoria. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the marble corridors behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was her personal assistant, Margaret, rushing toward her with yet another crisis to manage. But this time, Elena wasn't sure anything could be managed or contained. "Your Highness," Margaret's voice trembled as she approached, her usually perfect composure shattered. "The press has gathered outside the gates. They're asking questions about Lady Victoria's presence at the palace last night." Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Lady Victoria Ashworth, the woman she had just discovered was her stepmother, Queen Isabel's daughter from a previous relationship that had been kept secret for 30 years. The same woman who had just accused Elena's beloved stepmother of orchestrating a scheme that could destroy the monarchy itself. The morning had started like any other. Elena had been preparing for her weekly charity visit to the Children's Hospital when she heard raised voices coming from the Queen's private study. Against her better judgment, she had approached the door, which stood slightly ajar. What she heard through that crack in the door would haunt her forever. "You cannot continue to hide this, Mother." Victoria's voice had been sharp with anger and desperation. "I have every right to my inheritance, to my place in this family. You promised me when I was 18 that someday the truth would come out." Queen Isabel's response had been barely a whisper, but Elena heard every word with crystal clarity. "Victoria, you must understand. If the truth about your father's identity becomes public, it will not just affect you. It will destroy Elena's claim to the throne. The succession laws are clear about legitimate heirs." Elena's world had tilted on its axis. She had always known that Queen Isabel was her stepmother, having married her father, King Alexander, when Elena was just 5 years old. But she had never imagined that Isabel had a secret daughter, one whose very existence could challenge Elena's right to rule. The conversation had continued, each word like a dagger to Elena's heart. Victoria had revealed that her father was not just anyone, but Lord Edmund Blackwood, the king's own younger brother who had died in a riding accident 28 years ago. This meant Victoria was not just Elena's stepsister, but her cousin by blood, with a potentially stronger claim to the throne than Elena herself. "The DNA results are conclusive," Victoria had said, her voice growing stronger. "I am Edmund's daughter, which makes me a legitimate heir by blood. Elena may be Alexander's daughter, but she's adopted, isn't she? The public doesn't know that truth either." Elena's hand had flown to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She had always suspected something about her early childhood was different, but her father had never confirmed her adoption. Now, hearing it spoken aloud by this stranger who claimed to be family, the truth hit her like a physical blow. Queen Isabel's voice had cracked with emotion. "Victoria, please. Elena doesn't even know about the adoption. Alexander made me promise we would never tell her unless it became absolutely necessary. She believes she is his biological daughter, and in every way that matters, she is. He has raised her, loved her, prepared her to rule. But the law doesn't care about love, does it, Mother?" Victoria's tone had turned cold. "The law cares about bloodlines and legitimacy, and I am the legitimate bloodline heir." Elena had stumbled backward from the door, her mind reeling. Everything she had built her identity around, everything she had been trained for since childhood, was suddenly in question. She was adopted. She wasn't the biological princess she had always believed herself to be. And now there was someone else, someone with a potentially stronger legal claim to everything that had been promised to her. The revelation had sent her fleeing to this window, to this moment of trying to process a truth that seemed impossible to accept. Margaret's presence brought her back to the immediate crisis at hand. "Your Highness, what should I tell the press?" Margaret asked again, her voice urgent. Elena turned from the window, and Margaret gasped at the sight of her face. The usually composed princess looked pale and shaken, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Tell them," Elena began, then stopped. What did she tell them? That everything they thought they knew about the royal succession was potentially a lie? That the beloved queen had been keeping secrets that could topple a monarchy? That Elena herself might not be the rightful heir to the throne she had been preparing to inherit her entire life? Tell them that the royal family is dealing with a private matter and will make a statement when appropriate, Elena finally managed to say. But even as the words left her lips, she knew this was far from over. Victoria Ashworth wasn't going away quietly. She had waited 30 years to claim her birthright, and from the determination in her voice during that overheard conversation, Elena knew she wouldn't wait much longer. The sound of approaching footsteps made both women turn. King Alexander himself was walking toward them, his face grave and aged beyond his 62 years. Behind him walked Queen Isabel, her usual regal bearing replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. "Elena," her father's voice was heavy with emotion. "I believe we need to have a conversation that is long overdue." As her parents approached, Elena felt the last remnants of her old life slipping away. The comfortable certainties of her royal upbringing, the clear path to the throne that had been laid out before her since childhood, the very identity she had built around being Princess Elena of Valdoria, all of it was crumbling. But there was something else rising within her as well. A strength she didn't know she possessed, a determination that surprised even her. If everything she had believed about herself was changing, then perhaps it was time to discover who she really was beneath the crown and titles. The conversation that followed would test every relationship in the royal family. Victoria's claims would need to be investigated, Elena's adoption would have to be addressed, and the succession itself would be thrown into question. The monarchy of Valdoria, which had stood stable for over 3 centuries, was about to face its greatest crisis. As King Alexander reached for her hand, Elena lifted her chin with a dignity that was entirely her own, not learned from royal protocols or inherited through bloodlines. Whatever the truth about her birth, whatever Victoria's claims might mean for her future, she was still Elena. And she would face this crisis with the courage and grace that had been instilled in her through 25 years of love, guidance, and preparation for leadership. The storm was just beginning, but Elena was no longer the sheltered princess who had stood at this window an hour ago. She was someone new, someone who would have to fight for her place in the world rather than simply inheriting it. And perhaps, she thought as she squeezed her father's hand, that might make her a stronger ruler than she ever could have been otherwise. The palace bells chimed 9 o'clock, marking not just the hour, but the end of one chapter of Elena's life and the uncertain beginning of another. Outside, the press continued to gather, sensing a story that could change everything. Inside, a family prepared to confront secrets that had been buried for 3 decades. The revolution within the palace walls had begun. The king's private study had never felt smaller to Elena as she sat across from her father and stepmother, the late morning sun casting long shadows across the rich mahogany furniture. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 30 years of carefully guarded secrets that were finally demanding to be spoken aloud. King Alexander looked older than Elena had ever seen him. His silver hair, usually impeccably styled, was disheveled from running his hands through it, and the lines around his blue eyes seemed deeper than they had just hours before. Queen Isabel sat rigid in her chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. "Where do I even begin?" The king finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena found her own voice, steadier than she had expected. "Begin with the truth, father. All of it." Alexander's eyes met hers, and she saw love there, but also fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of her reaction to what he was about to reveal. "You came to us when you were 3 years old," he began, each word careful and measured. "Your biological parents, Elena, were dear friends of ours. Your mother was Isabel's cousin, Lady Catherine Montrose. Your father was Captain James Hartwell, one of my personal guards." Elena felt her breath catch. She had parents she had never known, people whose names she was hearing for the first time. They died in a car accident while returning from a state visit to our neighboring kingdom of Meridia. Queen Isabel continued, her voice thick with old grief. Catherine had asked me years before, when you were just a baby, to promise that if anything ever happened to them, we would take care of you. She and James had no other family. But why keep it secret? Elena asked, though part of her already understood. Because the succession laws of Valdoria are complex, King Alexander explained. An adopted child can inherit the throne, but only if there are no other legitimate blood heirs. When we adopted you, I'd already lost my brother Edmund, and I believed I would have no other children. You were our heir in every legal sense. But then Victoria appeared. Elena said, the pieces beginning to form a picture she didn't want to see. Queen Isabel's composure finally cracked, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. I was 17 when I met Victoria's father, Lord Edmund. We fell in love, but our relationship was considered inappropriate by both our families. When I discovered I was pregnant, Edmund's parents sent him away to the military, and my parents arranged for me to disappear to a distant estate until Victoria was born. Elena watched her stepmother struggle with the memory, feeling a strange mix of sympathy and anger. This woman had raised her with love and care, but had also kept secrets that now threatened everything Elena held dear. I gave birth to Victoria in secret and placed her with a loving family, the Ashworths, who couldn't have children of their own. Lord Edmund never even knew he had a daughter. He died 2 years later in that riding accident, still believing I had simply left him without explanation. The weight of the deception was staggering. Elena tried to imagine being Victoria, growing up knowing you were adopted, eventually discovering your true parentage, and learning that your biological mother had become a queen while you remained hidden. When did Victoria find out? Elena asked. 3 years ago, King Alexander answered. She hired private investigators to trace her biological parents. When she discovered the truth about her parentage and Isabel's identity, she reached out to us. We've been meeting with her secretly, trying to find a way to acknowledge her without destroying the stability of the monarchy. Elena stood abruptly, anger finally overtaking her shock. So for 3 years, you've known that my claim to the throne was questionable, and you said nothing? You let me continue preparing to be queen, making decisions about my life based on a future that might not exist. Elena, please understand. Queen Isabel rose as well, reaching out to her stepdaughter. We were trying to protect you and the kingdom. If Victoria's parentage became public knowledge without careful preparation, it could throw Valdoria into a constitutional crisis. And what exactly did you think would happen eventually? Elena's voice rose with each word. Did you believe this would simply go away? That Victoria would be content to remain in the shadows forever? The king moved to the window, his back to both women. We hoped to find a solution that would honor Victoria's heritage while preserving your future. Perhaps a place for her in the royal family that didn't challenge the succession directly. Elena felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. But that's not what Victoria wants, is it? She doesn't want a place in the family. She wants the throne. She wants recognition, Queen Isabel said quietly. She wants the world to know who she is, who her parents were. She wants the inheritance that would have been hers if circumstances had been different. And legally, she might be entitled to it. Elena said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, King Alexander turned back to face them. The constitutional lawyers have been reviewing the succession laws for months, he admitted. According to the traditional interpretation, Victoria, as Edmund's biological child, would indeed have a stronger claim than you, Elena, as my adopted daughter. However, there are arguments that 30 years of established succession, your formal recognition as heir, and the fact that Edmund never acknowledged Victoria could work in your favor. Elena sank back in her chair, overwhelmed. So my entire future depends on legal technicalities and interpretations? Your future depends on who you choose to be, Queen Isabel said firmly, moving to kneel beside Elena's chair. Blood and law aside, you're the heir this kingdom needs. You have been trained for this role. You understand our people. You have dedicated your life to serving Valdoria. That cannot be dismissed or replaced. Elena looked at this woman who had been her mother in every way that mattered, and felt her anger beginning to transform into something more complex. Yes, Isabel had kept devastating secrets, but she had also loved Elena unconditionally, had guided her, and supported her through every challenge of growing up in the public eye. What does Victoria want, specifically? Elena asked. King Alexander exchanged a glance with his wife before answering. She wants public acknowledgement of her parentage. She wants to be formally recognized as a member of the royal family. And she wants the succession question to be resolved according to traditional bloodline laws, which would make her the rightful heir, Elena concluded. Yes, he said simply. Elena felt something shift inside her, a strange sense of clarity cutting through the chaos of the morning's revelations. I want to meet with her. Elena, I'm not sure that's wise, Queen Isabel began, but Elena held up her hand. No, I need to meet her properly, not overhear conversations through doorways. If Victoria is my family, if she has a legitimate claim, then I need to understand who she is and what she truly wants. The king looked uncertain. The situation is volatile enough without what? Without the two people at the center of this crisis actually talking to each other. Elena stood again, this time with purpose rather than anger. Father, you and Isabel have been trying to manage this situation for 3 years, and where has it gotten you? Victoria is threatening to go public, the press is already sniffing around, and I'm just now learning the truth about my own life. She walked to the same window where her father had stood moments before, looking out at the gardens where she had played as a child, believing she was a true princess in a fairy tale. Perhaps it's time for a different approach. What are you thinking? Queen Isabel asked carefully. Elena turned back to face them, and they could see that something fundamental had changed in her demeanor. The shocked and angry young woman of moments before had been replaced by someone who looked remarkably like a leader. I'm thinking that secrets and hidden meetings have brought us to this crisis. Maybe it's time for honesty, even if it's painful. Maybe it's time to trust that the people of Valdoria deserve to know the truth about their royal family. King Alexander's eyes widened. Elena, you cannot be suggesting that we make all of this public. I'm suggesting that we stop letting fear make our decisions, she replied. Victoria has every right to know her heritage and to have it acknowledged. I have every right to know my own story, and the people of this kingdom have every right to understand who their leaders really are. The weight of her words settled over the room. Elena was proposing something that terrified her parents, but that felt necessary to her newly awakened sense of truth. And if the Constitutional Review determines that Victoria has the stronger legal claim? Queen Isabel asked quietly. Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering a question she had never imagined having to face. Then, perhaps the law will have to change, she said finally. Or perhaps I'll have to find a different way to serve my kingdom. The princess who had woken up that morning secure in her destiny was gone. In her place stood a young woman who was willing to fight for her beliefs, even if it meant risking everything she had been promised. The conversation was far from over, but Elena had made her decision. She would meet Victoria face to face, and together they would determine the future of Valdoria's monarchy, whatever that might mean for both their lives. The private dining room in the east wing of Ravencrest Palace had been chosen for its discretion and comfort, away from the main corridors where staff and visitors might accidentally overhear conversations that could change the course of history. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged and rearranged the simple tea service that had been prepared. She had spent the past 2 hours since leaving her parents' study preparing for this meeting with Victoria Ashworth, the woman who might be her sister, her rival, or both. Elena had changed clothes 3 times. Finally, settling on a simple blue dress that conveyed neither royal authority nor submission. She wanted to meet Victoria as equals, two women trying to understand their shared and complicated heritage. The sound of approaching footsteps made Elena's heart race. She took a deep breath, drawing on years of royal training to present a calm exterior, even as her mind churned with questions and fears about the conversation ahead. When the door opened and Victoria entered, Elena was struck first by their similarities. Victoria had the same dark brown hair as Elena, though hers fell in natural waves while Elena's was always perfectly styled. They were nearly the same height, and their facial features, while distinct, shared an indefinable quality that spoke of family connections. But where Elena carried herself with the polished grace of a lifetime in the royal spotlight, Victoria moved with a different kind of confidence, one earned through years of making her own way in the world without the protection of palace walls. "Princess Elena," Victoria said, offering a slight curtsy that seemed more ironic than respectful. "Please, just Elena," she replied, gesturing to the chairs arranged around the small table. "And may I call you Victoria?" "Of course." Victoria settled into her chair with an ease that surprised Elena. She had expected nervousness, anger, or at least some sign of the emotional intensity she had heard in Victoria's voice during the overheard conversation with Queen Isabel. Elena poured tea for both of them, grateful to have something to do with her hands. "I imagine this is as strange for you as it is for me," she began. Victoria accepted the cup with a slight smile. "Strange doesn't begin to cover it. 3 years ago, I was simply Victoria Ashworth, a successful art gallery owner in London with loving adoptive parents and a quiet life. Now I'm sitting in a palace, having tea with a woman who's been living the life that might have been mine." The directness of the statement hit Elena like a physical blow, but she appreciated the honesty. "I spent this morning learning that everything I believed about myself was partially a lie. So I think we're both experiencing some version of identity crisis." "Are you angry?" Victoria asked, studying Elena's face carefully. Elena considered the question seriously. "Yes, but not at you. I'm angry at the situation, at the years of secrecy, at the fact that we're meeting for the first time as adults when we should have been family all along." Something in Victoria's expression softened. "I've been angry for 3 years," she admitted. "Angry at Mother, at Queen Isabel, for giving me away. Angry at the circumstances that kept me from knowing my father. Angry at a system that would give me royal blood but no royal life." "Tell me about your life," Elena said. "I want to understand who you are beyond the constitutional crisis you represent." Victoria laughed, a sound with little humor in it. "That's refreshingly direct. Most people want to know about my claims to the throne, not about me as a person." Elena leaned forward. "The throne will sort itself out somehow. Right now, I want to know about my sister." The word hung between them, and Elena saw Victoria's eyes widen with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Sister," Victoria repeated quietly. "I've never had a sister before." "Neither have I," Elena replied. "At least, not that I knew of." Victoria set down her teacup and looked directly at Elena. "The Ashworths were wonderful parents. They told me I was adopted from the beginning, and they made sure I knew I was chosen and loved. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class home, went to good schools, had friends, and opportunities that many people would envy." Elena nodded, encouraging her to continue. "But there was always this sense of something missing," Victoria continued. "Not just knowledge of my biological parents, but a feeling that I belonged somewhere else, that there was some other life I was meant to be living. When I finally learned the truth about my parentage, it was both devastating and relieving. Everything suddenly made sense." "What do you mean?" Victoria hesitated before continuing. "I've always been drawn to leadership, to causes, to making changes in the world around me. My adoptive parents used to joke that I acted like I was born to rule something. When I discovered I actually was born into royalty, it felt like the puzzle pieces of my personality finally fit together." Elena felt a chill of recognition. She had always assumed her own leadership instincts, and sense of duty came from her royal training, but What if they were simply part of who she was, adopted or not? What do you want, Victoria? Elena asked gently. Not legally, not constitutionally, but personally. What do you want for your life? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the palace gardens. I want to matter, she said finally. I want to use whatever abilities and advantages I have to make a difference in the world. I want to be part of something larger than myself. That sounds like what I want too, Elena said softly. Their eyes met, and Elena saw her own longing reflected back at her. Not just the desire to rule, but the deeper need to serve, to be useful, to leave the world better than they found it. But there's only one throne, Victoria pointed out. Is there? Elena asked, an idea beginning to form. Valdoria hasn't had a constitutional crisis in centuries. Perhaps this is an opportunity to modernize, to find new ways of structuring royal service. Victoria looked intrigued. What are you thinking? Elena felt her excitement building as the possibilities took shape. What if we refuse to see this as a competition? What if we work together to create something new? The constitutional lawyers would say that's impossible, Victoria replied, but Elena could see interest in her eyes. Constitutional lawyers work within existing frameworks, Elena countered. But constitutions can be changed, traditions can be evolved. What if Valdoria became the first modern monarchy to truly embrace the idea of shared royal responsibility? Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying Elena with new interest. You would be willing to share power? To potentially give up your inheritance? Elena felt a moment of vertigo as she considered what she was suggesting. Everything she'd been trained for, everything her parents had prepared her to inherit, would be fundamentally altered. But somehow, sitting across from this woman who was family and stranger simultaneously, the idea felt right. I think I would be willing to redefine what inheritance means, Elena said carefully. If it meant creating something better for Valdoria, something that honored both our stories and our abilities. Victoria was quiet for several minutes, and Elena could almost see her processing the implications of this unexpected conversation. You realize this would be completely unprecedented, Victoria said finally. Yes. The press would have a field day. The establishment would resist. Other monarchies would think we've lost our minds. Probably. And there's no guarantee it would work. We barely know each other. We might discover we hate each other once we try to work together. Elena smiled. That's certainly possible. Victoria suddenly laughed, genuine sound of amusement and disbelief. This is insane. Yes, Elena agreed. But it might also be brilliant. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about the radical possibility Elena had proposed. Finally, Victoria spoke again. If we were to even consider something like this, we would need to know each other much better. We would need to understand each other's values, our approaches to leadership, our visions for the kingdom. Agreed, Elena said. And we would need to present a united front to our parents, to the constitutional lawyers, and eventually to the people of Valdoria. Victoria nodded slowly. It would require complete honesty between us. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas. No more secrets, Elena echoed. As if by unspoken agreement, both women stood. Victoria extended her hand to Elena, who took it without hesitation. Sister, Victoria said, testing the word again. Sister, Elena replied, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. Whatever they decided to do about the constitutional crisis, whatever the lawyers and politicians and press might say about their situation, Elena knew that this meeting had changed everything. She had found family she didn't know she was missing, and perhaps together they could find a way to honor both their heritage and their individual dreams for service. The revolution in the palace was becoming something none of them had expected. Not a battle for power, but a collaboration that might redefine what royal service could mean in the modern world. As they prepared to leave the dining room and face whatever challenges awaited them, Elena felt lighter than she had all day. The weight of secrets had been replaced by the exciting burden of possibility. The future was no longer predetermined, but perhaps that was exactly what both she and Victoria needed to become the leaders they were meant to be. 6 months later, Princess Elena stood on the balcony of Ravencrest Palace, looking out at the largest crowd ever assembled in the capital square of Valdoria. Beside her stood Victoria, no longer hidden in shadows, but wearing the formal robes of a newly created position, Princess Regent of Social Innovation. The sunlight caught the sapphires in both their crowns, symbols of a monarchy that had chosen evolution over tradition. The journey to this moment had been anything but smooth. The initial announcement of Victoria's existence and parentage had sent shockwaves through Valdoria and the international community. Headlines screamed about royal scandals, constitutional crises, and the stability of the kingdom. Stock markets fluctuated, diplomatic allies expressed concern, and Republican movements in neighboring countries gleefully predicted the collapse of another monarchy. Elena remembered the first emergency session of Parliament, when elderly constitutional scholars had argued for hours about succession laws that hadn't been tested in 3 centuries. Some demanded Victoria's immediate recognition as the rightful heir. Others insisted that Elena's established position took precedence. And still others suggested that both claims were so problematic that the monarchy itself should be abolished. But through it all, Elena and Victoria had presented a united front. They had spent countless hours together, sometimes agreeing, sometimes arguing passionately, but always working toward the same goal: finding a way to serve Valdoria that honored both their heritage and their individual strengths. The breakthrough had come during a particularly heated parliamentary debate when an elderly member had stood and declared that the kingdom was witnessing the death of tradition. Elena had risen from the royal box and asked permission to address the chamber. With respect, she had said, her voice carrying clearly through the historic hall. Traditions that cannot adapt to new circumstances are not traditions worth preserving. The strength of the Valdorian monarchy has never been in rigid adherence to ancient laws, but in our ability to serve our people in whatever way they most need. She had then outlined the proposal that she and Victoria had developed, a constitutional amendment that would create a new model of shared royal responsibility. Elena would retain the title of Crown Princess and eventual Queen, but Victoria would serve as Princess Regent with specific authority over social innovation, economic development, and international relations. Both would have equal say in matters of state, and both would be recognized as legitimate members of the royal family. The proposal had been radical, unprecedented, and initially met with significant resistance. But as Elena and Victoria traveled throughout Valdoria, meeting with citizens, business leaders, social organizations, and local governments, support for their innovative approach had grown. Victoria's background in the private sector brought fresh perspectives on economic challenges that the kingdom faced in an increasingly global economy. Her years of living as a private citizen gave her insights into the struggles of ordinary Valdorians that Elena, despite her genuine concern for her people, could not fully understand from within palace walls. Elena's lifetime of preparation for leadership, her deep understanding of Valdorian history and governmental structures, and her established relationships with international allies complemented Victoria's skills perfectly. Together, they formed a team that was stronger than either could have been alone. The constitutional amendment had passed by a narrow margin after 3 months of intense debate and public discussion. Queen Isabel had formally acknowledged Victoria as her daughter and publicly apologized for the years of secrecy. King Alexander had adopted Victoria officially, making her Elena's sister not just by blood through their uncle Edmund, but by law through their shared father. Now, as Elena looked out at the crowd gathered for their joint coronation ceremony, she felt a profound sense of rightness about the path they had chosen. The traditional ceremony had been modified to reflect their shared responsibilities, with both women taking oaths of service to the kingdom and its people. "Are you ready?" Victoria asked quietly, adjusting the ceremonial sash across Elena's shoulder. "I don't think anyone can be ready for this," Elena replied with a smile. "But I can't imagine doing it any other way. The Archbishop of Valdoria appeared beside them, carrying the ancient crown that had been worn by Elena's ancestors for generations. But beside him walked a craftsman carrying a newly created crown for Victoria, designed to complement Elena's while reflecting her unique role in the modern monarchy. As they moved toward the ceremonial podium where they would take their oaths, Elena reflected on how much had changed in just 6 months. The initial crisis that had threatened to destroy her life had instead transformed it into something richer and more meaningful than she could have imagined. The questions about their legitimacy and their ability to work together had been answered through their collaborative approach to every challenge they faced. When economic concerns arose, they addressed them together, with Victoria bringing innovative solutions and Elena providing governmental context. When diplomatic issues emerged, they presented a united front that had actually strengthened Valdoria's international relationships. More importantly, Elena had discovered that sharing power didn't diminish her own authority, but enhanced it. Having Victoria as a partner meant having someone who could challenge her ideas, support her during difficult decisions, and bring different perspectives to every situation they faced. As the Archbishop began the coronation ceremony, speaking words that had been updated for this historic occasion, Elena felt the weight of the crown settle on her head differently than she had expected. It felt lighter somehow, perhaps because the burden of leadership was now shared. Do you, Elena Catherine Hartwell, Princess of Valdoria, swear to serve the people of this kingdom with wisdom, compassion, and dedication to their welfare above your own? I do so swear, Elena replied, her voice carrying clearly across the square. Do you, Victoria Isabel Ashworth, Princess Regent of Valdoria, swear to serve the people of this kingdom with innovation, integrity, and commitment to their prosperity and progress? I do so swear, Victoria answered, her voice strong with conviction. The crowd erupted in cheers as both women turned to face their people, crowned and committed to a new form of royal service that had never been attempted before. In the royal box, King Alexander and Queen Isabel watched with tears in their eyes. The secret that had haunted their marriage and threatened their family had been transformed into something that strengthened both the monarchy and their personal relationships. Elena's adoptive parents, Lord and Lady Hartwell, sat beside Victoria's adoptive parents, the Ashworths, all of them united in their pride and love for the two remarkable women who had chosen collaboration over competition. As the ceremony concluded and Elena and Victoria prepared to address their people together for the first time as joint leaders, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. She had begun this journey 6 months ago, believing she knew exactly who she was and what her future held. That certainty had been shattered, but what had emerged from the chaos was something far more valuable. She was still Princess Elena, heir to the throne of Valdoria. But she was also Victoria's sister, part of a partnership that was already changing how their kingdom approached everything from economic policy to social justice. She was a leader who had chosen to define her own path rather than simply inherit one designed by others. Victoria caught her eye and smiled, the expression warm with shared accomplishment and anticipation for the challenges ahead. They had work to do, a kingdom to serve, and a new model of monarchy to perfect through trial and experience. The crowd below continued to cheer as Elena and Victoria stepped forward together to address the nation they would now lead as partners. The speech they had prepared outlined their vision for Valdoria's future, a kingdom that honored its traditions while embracing innovation, that valued both stability and progress, that demonstrated how even the most ancient institutions could evolve to meet the needs of modern citizens. As Elena began to speak, her voice joining with Victoria's in words they had crafted together, she realized that the crisis that had once threatened to destroy everything she held dear had instead given her the greatest gift of her life, a sister, a partner, and a completely new understanding of what it meant to serve. The revolution in the palace was complete, but the revolution in Valdoria was just beginning. And Elena couldn't wait to see what they would accomplish together. The future, once predetermined and lonely, was now unwritten and shared. And that made all the difference in the world.